I, too, am from a very large and loving family, and I understand how hard it is to have everybody come together and then stop. You're just seeing each other and you're excited, and that's wonderful. Up high? Higher? Volume up, guys. Keep it coming? How's that? Well, you might tire of this, but you can always do that. My name is Kathy Carroll, and I'm a good friend of the family, Ann and Steve in particular, and Francis and Josh and Abby and Daniel. And they asked me if I would come and help keep things flowing today in whatever way I can do. I did not bring a whip. I did not bring a chair. But I think we'll, just be able to rise to the occasion and do this. Although I was told by Marlon Kaiser, the president of WGTE, that Ann was such a stickler for starting on time. And we've already broken that rule, so take some liberties if you like. I'm honored to be here and to be asked to do this, in particular because I don't think I ever asked Ann or Steve to do anything that they did not agree to do. And we asked for a lot of, would you mind housing some guest artists? Would you mind having a special dinner? Would you mind doing this? Would you mind supporting this? They were always available. And I used to joke with Ann that she didn't know when she married Steve that she was going to have an orchestra at dinner every night and that we were actually moving in with them and their marriage and their family, and we never left. A bit of housekeeping. This evening is being live streamed, as you know, and there are people who are watching from wherever they are, Colorado or even parts of Toledo, Virginia, who knows. We will have each of our speakers come up and introduce themselves so that you can follow along in the program, and that will save some time getting people up and out here. But we also will leave some time for those of you who may be moved by the Spirit to add a few comments of your own. One of the reasons I am here with this crown on my head, this flower wreath, is that Ann and I had a way of doing this to one another for all kinds of occasions, and flower crowns were our thing. And so Francis, knowing this, had a crown for me today, and I'm not the bride, but I'm happy to wear it, and I'm happy to get us started. I'm starting off with a poem, and I'll read the dedication of the book that Ann wrote after I read this poem. I need more volume? All right. I need more light, too, so thank God for Apple. Okay. A wedding round containing both a moral and a blessing. A shiny weekend with an extra day, enough time for love in the morning, breakfast on the porch. Then I see my husband off down the river in his boat and come to celebrate the first day of your marriage. Second time around for both of them, says someone. But I look at your heads together, the color of Moselle, rings cut from the same gold, toast you in light as ale light as champagne. Someone could drink from those slippers. Explore the house you have prepared to welcome each other home. And think of my first, only mate, sailing back upriver, maybe for hours, it all depends on the wind. The best of us can be swamped by a hidden morning gust, or manage the jibe and still be stayed all afternoon, giving up in the end in irons. I wait by the dock, wonder how many times we've been around. Once, when we slept away the extra days. Twice, when I left, 3 or 4, or was it 10, when I found I couldn't go? And I listen carefully as he describes each difficult tack and the good reach home. Thank God who gives us enough time and changes in the wind. Then sleep, splashed in wedding sun. When Ann published this 30 years later in 2011, she said, "For my beloved Kathy, who went around exactly the right number of times and found Carl, my present husband." I'm honored also to read a piece written by Peg Emerson. It will explain itself as we go along, as she and George and Ann and Steve were fast friends from early on in their young married lives. Peg says, "This is a brief tale paying tribute to a treasured 70-year friendship with Ann Stranahan. In the late 1950s, Peg and George Emerson moved to Toledo to launch their adult lives. George would produce data for Owens, Illinois on their brand new computers, while Peg would teach English and history at Maumee Valley Country Day School. The school had found us a spacious apartment that had previously served as a chauffeur's quarters on the Bell Estate in Perrysburg. Shortly after, newlyweds Ann and Steve Stranahan moved into the remodeled chicken coop just across the courtyard from us. The four of us soon became lifelong friends. Ann took her artistic training to the Toledo Museum of Art. Steve was involved with his family's business, Champion Sparkplug. Ann and I built a strong relationship and involved ourselves in learning all about Toledo. And then came the babies. 3 for me, 4 for Ann. As the children grew, Ann and I frequently met for afternoon tea while the kiddos played. Once our children were all in school, Ann and I launched ourselves into community service. Ann into fundraising for the Toledo Symphony, and I into Planned Parenthood. We both joined the Junior League, which expanded our local knowledge and as well as building our community skills. We often vacationed together in northern Michigan, a happy mix of adults and children. Later, we traveled to Egypt and Greece together. Among her many community activities, Ann chaired the board of the public television channel WGTE. When Ann led the search for a new director of the station, she recruited Bob Smith from Washington, D.C. Ann then convinced me to share my skills with him, which resulted in a long and happy career for me as TV program manager for the station. Ann and I enjoyed working together to build wider financial support and increased audiences for WGTE. What a wonderful adventure we had, facing challenges and successes together. In years later, after Steve's death, Ann moved to Florida, where we again found opportunities for fun and happy times together. Ann was a remarkable woman whom I was fortunate to call my special friend for 70 years. And now we'll hear from Frances. You might need this. You may need the light.
It was hard for me to hear you. Yeah. How is that on the volume? What does that mean? Oh, closer? Closer? Better? I worked hard. I don't want you to not hear me. I can't hold it, I don't think. Okay. But I'll get I'll be nice and close. I'm Frances Perry. I'm Frances Perry, Ann and Steve's oldest daughter. Thank you all so much for being here. It's very special to look around this room and see all of these familiar faces and so many generations here. I'm going to read a poem in a minute, but I find that listening to a poem, it can be helpful to have a little background. So, I was heading back to college, saying goodbye to my mother, one November or December one of those particularly difficult times to be traveling into the cold, getting dark too early, New England kind of seasons. My mother pressed a folded piece of paper into my hand. I remember its typewritten words neatly filling the page. It was this poem. When we talked on the phone a subsequent Sunday evening, she was so eager to know, what did you think of the poem? I had read it, but I was too young, busy, and naive to really read it, to spend time with it. I so wish that I had made space then to sit quietly with her beautifully crafted words and gotten to know them better. Now, I'm not so young, and this poem and I have grown very fond of one another. I marvel at her striking descriptive narrative. Pressed the barns against the cows. Think about that when we get there. I feel this poem now, Mom. Thank you so much for sharing it with me. Window on the river. Seeing you again was waking up in March, seeing the gulls high in my window, high above the bright white river, beating against the southwest wind, flying inland off the great frozen lake. The bridges, the mirrored decks of barges mired since December. Waking under my white comforter, hearing the seagulls screaming the news that somewhere past my window, past Mommy, Napoleon, up towards Defiance, some high-flying, sideways bird's eye had sighted water flowing. The ice was breaking. The snow was going. Snow that kept back the trucks, the light, the freighters waiting for grain, weighted me under my quilt. The wheat fields under white, silent waves that rose above the fences pressed the barns against the cows and smothered the branches in the orchard until we thought we'd not eat fruit again. And then, dazed, beaming in the summer market, I hugged tumbling bags, baskets of peaches, such fruit not seen, not tasted, since I floated in hazy dog and child days, lulled, pulled by the currents of long tidewater summers. Fruit nurtured in sandy soil, salted by the York, Pamunkey, Rappahannock. Rivers always flowing, running to the Chesapeake, reaching to the ocean, curling into whitecaps, white as the snow curving over the orchard that gave birth to the pink, golden, growing, held in the eye of the seed, deep in the down of winter, white as the quilt that covered me when I woke up and saw the gulls, wheeling past my window, shrieking the news. The ice was breaking. Seeing you again was knowing that water had been sighted, that the snow was going, that a 10-year-old would sit again on a hot, bleached dock in August, watching seagulls and eating peaches. A beauty of a poem. Thank you.
Let's try this again. Can everybody hear me? Okay. Kathy told me to introduce myself, and I always do what Kathy tells me. So I will start out. My name is Marna Ramnath. I am the current board chair of the Toledo Alliance for the Performing Arts, which is the home of the Toledo Symphony, the Toledo Ballet, and the Toledo Jazz Orchestra, and a past chair of WGTE Public Media, which was where I had my first contact with Ann. There's a saying that those who touch our lives stay in our hearts forever. Ann Anderson Stranahan touched the hearts and minds and lives of many people in many places. One of the places that her spirit and legacy shone the most brightly was in the world of WGTE Public Broadcasting, now Public Media, as she strove to make its mission of education and lifelong learning take root. Without exaggeration, Ann was affectionately known as the mother of public broadcasting in this community. She earned that title in the very early days of WGTE's existence, and she wore it forever after. WGTE exists and continues to serve this community largely because of the foresight, the spirit, and the determination of Ann Stranahan. Throughout the years that Ann served on the board and as board chairman, she was an integral part of guiding it from a fledgling operation run by the seat of the pants to the programmatic and technologically sophisticated organization that it is today. Her touch can be seen in the entire span of the history to date. Ann's reach extended beyond Toledo as she went on to serve on the board of the National Corporation for Public Broadcasting, as you've already heard. And it was at a time when its very existence was at risk. And it was at a time when women were not well represented around the table, if at all. Hers was a voice that was listened to, and she was a force to be reckoned with as she earned the respect of her colleagues and paved the way for the women who followed her. Ann led by example, with an abundance of qualities that are intrinsic in good leaders and in human beings. Integrity, honesty, courage, loyalty, diligence, perseverance, and determination, kindness, empathy, curiosity, humor, and generosity. In the spirit of Ann's love for poetry, and with a touch of whimsy, I want to share a poem by Edgar Albert Guest titled, "It Couldn't Be Done." Somebody said that it couldn't be done, but she, with a chuckle, replied that maybe it couldn't. But she would be one who wouldn't say so till she'd tried. So she buckled right in with a trace of a grin on her face. If she worried, she hid it. She started to sing as she tackled the thing that couldn't be done, and she did it. Somebody scoffed, "Oh, you'll never do that. At least no one ever has done it." But she took off her coat, and she took off her hat, and the first thing we knew, she begun it. With a lift of her chin and a bit of a grin, without any doubting or quit it, she started to sing as she tackled the thing that couldn't be done, and she did it. There are thousands to tell you it cannot be done. There are thousands to prophesy failure. There are thousands to point out to you one by one the dangers that wait to assail you. But just buckle in with a bit of a grin. Just take off your coat and get to it. Just start to sing as you tackle the thing that cannot be done, and you'll do it. That was Ann. In closing, I'd like to paraphrase the words of playwright Carrie Hamilton. Our legacy is really in the lives we touch, in the inspiration we give to others, and if even for a moment in getting them to think, to try, to laugh, to cry. More than anything, our legacy is in our smiles, the ones we share with our closest and dearest, and the ones we bestow on total strangers who need it in that moment, and God put us there to deliver. Anne was a guiding light and a shining star. May her memory be a blessing.
Okay, it's a test. Hi, I'm Abby Stranahan, third of the 4 children born to Steve and Ann between January of 1960 and December of 1969. Those of you who know me might have heard me say, I owe my life to the Toledo Museum of Art. This is not hyperbole. In 1957, our mother was in her senior year at Smith College, a major in art history, her future secured with the plan to marry the New England boy she'd been dating throughout college. Sometime that spring, however, things took a turn, and inexplicably, that future that she saw for herself so clearly had fallen through. And rather suddenly, she had to create for herself a new plan, a new vision of herself living her life. She had to get a job. Otto Whitman, who would go on to become the director of the Toledo Museum, was on campus recruiting for educational guides, docents as they were called at the time. She got the job, and here we all are. And a new but very uncertain future lay ahead of her. At the age of 22, she packed her Amelia Earhart suitcase and boarded a train for the Midwest. She had looked reality square in the eye and made her best shot. As it happened, things moved quickly from there. And just a year after that photo in your program was taken, she was married and launching into a remarkably successful and purposeful life in a place she never imagined she would live. So maybe the museum had nothing to do with it, but that it is to our mother's bravery that we owe our lives. A bravery she modeled through the twists and turns of her entire life, applied differently, but to so many occasions, and a bravery that was, frankly, lost on me until only recently, in the last few years of her life. For what was she brave, though? Why do that hard thing? Because it's the right thing to do, of course. She was brave for herself, for that tender dream she held for herself to make a mark, to have her life and her words matter. She fiercely pulled herself up again and again to show up for that dream. She had to be brave for that longing for herself. And she was tremendously brave for others. She became an ardent champion of Toledo, a believer. She made things better wherever she was involved. She was able to articulate the essence of a thing as much in poetry as in prose, as she was often called upon to do by writing that mission statement, that cultural or educational or community organization's history that was captivating, that told the story, that transmitted a vision with words. Painting the picture of what was. Her ability to get to the nub of a thing was uncanny. Her poetry is that same probing vision. Sometimes, though, that nub was an awkward truth, and the hard thing she had to do was unpopular. Sometimes, as my cousin Rico Prudhomme shared in a letter a few days ago, stepping forward to provide care for others was itself an act of bravery, because it was hard to feel the need to give it, and it was hard to feel the authority to give it. She was a brave provider of care. And sometimes that boldness, that verve, quite simply took me by surprise. My mother was invited to speak at a school assembly. Think 1970s, open architecture, a phalanx of students, small to large, for whom being talked to by grown-ups was customary. I was maybe 11 or 12, and she was on the board of the school at the time, and so this was not in and of itself unusual. I was somewhere toward the back, of course, and couldn't see her, but I could hear the words coming out of my mother's mouth very clearly as she stepped forward and began to speak. "'Twas brillig, and the slivey toes did gyre and gimble in the wabe. All mimsy were the boro groves and the mome raths outgrabe." Huh? My heart froze. My mother short-circuiting in front of 200 of my peers. To my horror, she continued, "Beware the Jabberwock, my son, the jaws that bite, the claws that catch." But this is gibberish, I thought. Not my precise and articulate mother. Panic set in. I was confused and helpless to do anything to stop her. But the large room was silent, in rapt attention, like the children seated at her feet in that photo. She was leaning in. She held no punches. He took his vorpal sword in hand. Long time. Oh, I think I might have missed a page, you guys. He took his vorpal sword in hand. Long time the maxim foe he sought. So rested he by the tum-tum tree and stood a while in thought. She was on fire, and evidently my peers were eating it up, even those older, cool kids I had my eye on. The Jabberwock with eyes of flame came whiffling through the tugly wood and burbled as it came. 1, 2, 1, 2, and through the vorpal blade went snicker-snack. The words were nonsensical, but what they transmitted was undeniably powerful. And the sensation of that felt to me at that moment not a little transgressive, like a scrim that obscured the tantalizing drama of life, of a big life, had been pulled away. "And hast thou slain the Jabberwock? Come to my arms, my beamish boy, O fraptious joy, Callooh, Calloy," he chortled in his joy. She had slayed. And she was asking us to be brave. That ramshackle bunch of us, not in the pleated pinafores or starched white shirts of the 1950s, but children of the 60s, of turbulent, changing times. She was telling us to recognize that power in ourselves, to step up to that drama that is ours and only ours to tell. Not to be fearless, but to step up to those fears and to be brave for ourselves. And in that bold act, when we also manage to show up for others too, so that they can be brave. She was showing us how to be brave. So there you have it. Without really seeing it or knowing it, at the time I was emboldened by my mother's boldness, and what a legacy. I'm grateful also to have learned from her in the last few years of her life that our dreams for ourselves simply do not die. They live on in us and drive us to make bold choices. She pulled up her roots of 60 years in Toledo and moved herself and our father to Chicago for better care for him and better care for her. A hard decision that left many people she knew and loved behind. She had looked reality square in the eye and made her best shot to keep being brave for her dream for herself. There's always that story we're telling, that big drama of our own lives being written, even as you're sitting here listening to me. She published her book of poems, A Window on the River, in her 76th year. She was boldly authoring the next chapter of her life in her 88th year, in which she and her second husband, Norm Tykeson, would live with verve and style in Denver, Colorado. She knew how to pack a bag and go boldly on. In that astrophysical wormhole that is our perception of aging and time, hurtling toward the finite with time speeding up, our parents' story feels nearer and dearer. We feel the chase ourselves and the preciousness of life, of those passing minutes and the choices we made, the choices we still have left. I hope for the bravery my mother had, and that I'm so grateful for, to look them in the eye and choose boldly.
Oh, I have to do this, don't I? Tell me when. Yeah, right there. All right. Had enough? Closer, really? Okay, or louder. Oh man, I can't read with this thing right in my nose. I didn't write an introduction, but I was thinking about one as I sat and heard all the other wonderful reflections about Mom. And I'm choosing a poem from her book. It's the first poem called Kite Strings, and it references a giant locust in our backyard that we grew up with. It sat about halfway down the hill to the river, kind of crowning up above the lawn. And I realized, I think one thing that drew me to this poem is that I sat for a long time talking about ideas and poetry with Mom growing up in the living room of our house there. And that locust sort of crowned up through the big plate glass windows behind her. And some of you probably know it. Some of you have been on that property, probably know it pretty well. So I think that's ultimately what led me to this poem. It doesn't hurt. I think I'm referenced in it, so that might not hurt either, but always nice. But this is Kite Strings from our poem, our book of poems. The first kite my father made for me, the first kite I was allowed to hold, tugged itself from my hand on a sandy cliff, named for a small murdered prince. I watched in misery as it sailed across the sea to Spain, my father pointed out, offering cartography in place of loss. He made his kites of paper, muslin, cellophane, crackling, red-bellied, drunk with sun. One year, he telephoned an aeronautical engineer in conference in a wind tunnel to ask if he could buy some Mylar. All that summer at the shore, surfers and their girls sat on their boards to point at my father, intent on his watch in the dunes, at his busy silver head and the tiny flickering phantom jet that whistled and climbed from the sea oats to the Atlantic. After he died, my mother and I, to kill time, checked out a fancy high-rise retirement home. We left in a hurry, not to escape the social director's yawns, the pink steel doors, no, because looking down from the convalescent floor, we saw a young man and a little girl pulled out by the sweep of the April wind that Sunday afternoon, running together, calling, laughing, lifting a kite above the empty lawns. Early this spring, the day I realized I was middle-aged, the wind rocketed off the plains, backed the river up, unlocked a fine acrylic kite from my last child's grip, and jammed it on a thorn at the top of our old locust. 40 days at least, and it's still there, too stuck to be brought down by rocks or BBs, too tough to rip. It flies in place, head braced against the current, wings whipping to windward. Below, leaves come out to meet it. The river eases into May. The kite flutters, chatters, hums, hangs on. Flaming red, drenched with yellow, fixed in the space I watch each morning between the sky and heaven. Thank you.
I think I can get this. Welcome. Sorry, I'm used to saying welcome when I'm at a podium. It's good to see everybody. My name is Margot McElwain Nishimura, and I have the distinguished honor, I think, to represent the friends of Francis and Josh and Abby and Daniel. And it's a kind of privileged place to be the friend of the Stranahan kids. My own family lined up exactly with theirs. And you have a kind of privileged view, different view. There are a lot of things that you don't see, that you don't know, but there are also some insights that you get. And Abby and I didn't confer. There is a little overlap, but let me read. Writing this reflection was not the first time Ann Anderson Stranahan presented me with what felt like an impossible task. The first time came in January 1981. It was part of a Maumee Valley Country Day School winterim course called Off the Walls, Words of Art. And I even have the program from the performance of this. And David, you're here. I can see you. Anne and MV Upper School art teacher David Burkett had conceived of this course as a 3-week residency here in the museum for 10 students to, quote, look and listen and write. And that's exactly what we did. I'm sure with some kind of daily guidance, but I don't really remember any of that. We had a home base in an empty gallery, and we spent much of the day wandering and looking and writing about whatever we were drawn to. We mostly kept our shoes on. I think Anne and David and curators and other museum staff must have shared their knowledge of artists and individual works, but so casually that nothing still registers in my memory as a formal art history lesson, and believe me, I've had many since. We were, it seems, trusted to know something just for seeing it, and it was, as you might imagine, a truly magical time. And then came the assignment from Anne. I'm sure with the best of pedagogical intention, and it still affects me, to write a sestina. As some of you might already know, and as the Poetry Foundation website tells us, a sestina is a complex French verse poem, usually unrhymed, consisting of 6 stanzas of 6 lines each and a 3-line envoy. The endwords of the first stanza are repeated in a different order as endwords in each of the subsequent 5 stanzas. The closing envoy continues all 6 words, 2 per line, placed the middle and at the end of the 3 lines. Got it? I'd never been so confounded by anything in all of my 16 years. But like the rest of my classmates, and I think I remember through a few tears, I found my 6 museum-related words. We had at least those guardrails. And I got on with it. I got on with writing that goddamn sestina for Anne, because what do you do when Anne asks you to do something? The word, as you can tell, still fills me with dread, and of all the memories I have of Anne that could have popped into my head as I approached the present task, I wondered, why this one? And then it occurred to me that perhaps Anne herself was sending me again what she thought was a gift. And this time, 43 years later, it really was. The strength of the sestina, according to comedian, actor, and writer Stephen Fry, is the, quote, repetition and recycling of elusive patterns that cannot be quite held in the mind all at once. What better metaphor and direction could there be for writing about Anne and her prodigious and varied gifts? All I needed to make this happen, to give some order to the elusive patterns, were 6 words. So here goes, in no particular order, the words, each with at least the start of an explanation or impression. Mother. Anne was a vocal and formidable maternal advocate. One of my favorite memories comes from the drizzly, cold sidelines of an away soccer game, with Anne demanding to know from Coach Colte why he wasn't putting Abby, me, and the other younger girls on the field. I'm not sure this had the desired effect at the time, but from this incident I learned, first, just to be there. It was a miserable day far from home. And even if I'm not always effective, to speak up on behalf of and look out for both my own and the children of others. Instigator. Anne, as we've heard, could make things happen. My own mother was a very hard worker and taught me how to get things done, but Abby's mom, well, she knew how to create entirely new, beautiful, and big and wondrous things. Be it a conservation-minded vacation resort in Colorado, or embedding 10 teenagers in an art museum for almost a month. Hostess. I'm not sure Anne would necessarily like this choice, but I'm not sure what other single word conveys that certain aspect of her generous spirit manifest in how welcoming she was, or so it seemed to me, to crowds of MV students. It is, of course, a personal perspective, and one I appreciated and have tried my best to channel with my own children when overcoming some probably well-founded hesitation about hosting the co-ed Halloween sleepovers. Teacher. If I could just direct you to the photo already referenced by Abby in today's program, Anne could command a crowd's attention. She was a natural, confident, and inspiring speaker and a knowledgeable and caring educator, a talent recognized in its nascent form in 1957 by legendary museum director Otto Whitman, you've heard this already, and appreciated by audiences, some as small as one, ever since. Visionary, in brief, and you've also heard many examples of this, you have to have imagination and vision to make things happen. Who else would have seen so many possibilities in the fine needlework of Toledo's Hmong community? And finally, creative. What more do I need to say? Noun, an adjective, subject, and object, period. So these are my 6 words for Anne: mother, instigator, hostess, teacher, visionary, creative. While I don't have a completed sestina today to honor her legacy, I hope you'll agree it's a good start. And I've learned, and if I've learned anything from her and from Abby, who learned so well from her mom, the best way to make things happen is, in fact, to be generous with whatever you have, be it time or resources, and to just get started. Francis, Josh, Abby, and Daniel, thank you for letting me share this very personal, if still incomplete, in progress, and ongoing appreciation of your wonderful mother. Without her as a role model, I'm sure my own life would have taken a very different path, and for many others, I know she made a huge difference. Thank you.
I'm Kitty Beth Milhan. And anyway, I'm coming from a little different perspective than many who shared Anne through her Oh dear, yeah, okay. Can you hear now? Succinct, not all garbled. Okay. Anyway, I'm coming from a little different perspective than the many who have shared Anne through her contributions to the community and its institutions, such as her early years here at the Toledo Museum, her work with WGTE, the promotion of the Hmong community, Maumee Valley Country Day School, Need More Fund, her leadership at Trinity Church, etc. Rather, our connection was, quote, in downtime, through shared personal experiences, family friendships, and inclusion. Our first meeting was at a social event in 1974, and the conversation revealed that we both had family members, her oldest nephew and my daughter, who had been seriously ill, and both children shared the same pediatric practice in Boston. How could we have ever predicted that that nephew's brother would one day end up as my son-in-law? That man was born in India, so I think it was karma. Even as I say that, we sit here in this beautiful Christian cloister, which seems to be a very apt location for honoring Anne also, who practiced her faith religiously. Over the next 30 years, our friendship developed and solidified, mostly because of our sons, Daniel and Drew, who became fast friends during their early primary school years at MV and have remained close for 50 years. Much of that steadfastness I attribute to Anne's example and her commitment to all her endeavors. And as a result, I was the fortunate recipient of her support, her kindness, her inclusion, and her generosity of spirit. Our companionship brought Sundays and religious holiday celebrations, usually minus the children, at Trinity where we worship, but also delighted in the pageantry of the service with priests garbed in their Hmong vestments, which she had made for them, and which exemplified her love and appreciation for color and design. I was invited on trips to Chautauqua for R&R and learning, an experience that she had shared with her mother and her sister over many years. I was included in family and friend celebrations, weddings, anniversaries, birthdays, both at home and at the home ranch, sharing trips to visit family members in New York, and sharing stays at her pied-à-terre in the city. These and many other interactions, such as just picking up our boys from one house or another, allowed for spontaneous sharing of thoughts, how one moves forward after adversity, and mutual support when that adversity rears its ugly head. I've missed Anne since her departure, first to Chicago and then to Shell Point, and I often recall with fondness all that we shared and all that I learned from her. Her ability with words, her sense and implementation of design, her talents using a computer, and her dedication to family. It was a privilege to be her friend. I repeat, I repeat that her support, kindness, and generosity to me and my children will be treasured forever, as well as the joy and sharing of many memorable events with her children. Anne used words so beautifully. I'm not so succinct. But in closing, I'd like to share a quote by Sir Winston Churchill, which I think also describes Anne very well. And that is, quote, "What is the use of living if it be not to strive for noble causes and to make this muddled world a better place for those who will live in it after we are gone?"
Can you hear me? Okay. I'm Sarah Perry. I am the youngest of Francis and fall somewhere in the middle of the grandchildren of Ann and Steve. And I'm going to read a poem, and first I have a little reflection. My grandmother's birthday was 2 days ago. For many years, I celebrated with her on horseback. It was a tradition of sorts, Ann's birthday ride, spent with neighbors, long-term guests of the ranch, and friends. A lope through the meadow, the aspens wearing their new yellow leaves, a bottle of champagne at our lunch spot. It was bliss. I've heard my granny read this poem quite often, in the dining room of the home ranch, by the campfire in the evening mountain chill, both nestled on the land she describes. The Elk River Valley holds a piece of my heart and has since I can remember. It is where my relationship with my grandparents grew, where I witnessed their love for each other, their family, and the land. It's where a young girl, then a teenager, then an adult, learned a great deal about the importance of family and the power the soulful pull of a place can have. Where birthday rides last into your 80th year. Where grannies and granddaughters feel like friends. As my granny said to me in a message, when I think of dead elk, I see you on the sofa. Cherished days, a mighty bond. A mighty bond indeed. This is inspecting the property. We thought we wanted to buy the land, but first we had to see it. 600 acres, more or less, almost a county mile, all of it withheld, a mystery, gripped by the deepest snow in memory. There was nothing to do but ski it. So we set out, reaching our poles to the sky, so knapsacked and knickered even our shadows looked Nordic. We skimmed white meadows that might grow our hay, flew over fences that would keep the cows out, slid down to the creek to consider the trout caught in a wide net of ice. Our skis as thin as the legs of deer, as fleet as elusive, we were graceful and foolish by turns, gliding, sweating, racing the sun, or falling in desperate splashes, freezing and salted, beseeching the land to let us pass, making a deal with our muscles until our tracks stretched clean and long. I could feel the soft fat melt and drip into my socks, imagined my thighs growing tight and lean, thought even my teeth had grown tough enough to snatch off some bark from the trees, to break bread with the elk, who watched above our heads. We bit instead into a peanut bar, chewy, brittle as the bark, and drank a little can of beer, sprinkling some on the snow, baptizing it with our name, laying impermanent claim to what might lie below. Just as some small animal had left proprietary drops around what appeared to be a feathery sapling, ankle high that we had brushed with our wooden wings, realizing only as we left our land that it was the top of a Christmas tree, its presence buried until the spring. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Anthony Prudhomme, Ann's youngest nephew, her sister Sarah's youngest son. I chose to read a poem, the title of which is, I believe, I don't actually know the background, it sounds like the old directions for beginning to cook chicken soup. Take one mature bird, plucked and singed. Trying to buy myself comfort, I stop for a can of chicken soup. 8 different chicken soups to choose from, and I'm in the middle of a nervous breakdown. Chicken soup with noodles, a long, limp line. This may go on forever, unfinished. Chicken soup with curly noodles, lots of little indecisions. With chicken soup and rice, I might swallow some grain of truth, whereas chicken broth sounds hollow. Toss out the chicken soup with vegetables. My salad days are over. Too much trouble. And better altogether to forget the thought of cream of chicken soup with mushrooms. I've had a dream about my brain buzzed up in the Cuisinart. Chicken soup with dumplings lies heavy on the heart. Best by far to stick with chicken soup and stars waiting at the bottom of the pot.
We'll see if I've worked this out yet. Now, before we close, there's an opportunity for you, if the Spirit moves you, to come ahead. Josh is going to finish us off before we go to the reception, but you may have something on your mind that you want to share, some observation, some comment, something. Seeing none, I think we're all kind of full of wonderful emotions. Josh, please take the podium.
I have to do battle too here. I'm Josh and Steve's second child, and it's a privilege to be here. My personal comment is that it took me a long time to realize my mom and I were both second children, and I learned to become an ally, and I love that. And she was a wonderful ally. She also raised us on a river. Here are notes from my uncle Pete, which he so eloquently wrote, and I'm going to share on his behalf. Ann and I grew up in a 1920s bungalow on a wooded ridge overlooking the James River in Richmond, Virginia. There weren't many other children in our neighborhood, so we were pretty much thrown together as playmates, and she and I became and remained throughout our lives best friends as well as siblings. She arrived in this world about 20 months after I did, but practically speaking, I was from that moment on completely in her thrall. We shared a bedroom that was also our playroom. From her earliest days, she spun tales, enchanting stories that she acted out with two playmates named Cotsmack and Summerscene. I see them clearly, formed by her thumb and index finger, strutting around the bedroom rug, nodding their chubby finger heads at my stodgy wooden block structures. I was dimly aware even then that Cotsmack and Summerscene had sprung from a different world and more fanciful world, a world apart from mine, than my two guys named James and Morrison, whom I'd borrowed from a book that had been read to us and were decidedly earthbound. Although I was less than 2 years older than Ann, for most of the year I was able to boast that I was a full 2 years older. When I was 4, she was 2, etc. Until September rolled around and suddenly she was 3. I worried that she was catching up. She was going to pass me, spring ahead, unseat me as firstborn. Ann was plump and blonde and blue-eyed, and Mother commissioned her friend Sophie to paint her portrait. Ann was and remained always the beauty of the family. One day she showed me how she could tie the sashes of her pinafore in a bow behind her back. I couldn't begin to imagine how she did it. Fighting back pure envy at her skill, I knew from that moment that she inhabited a world in which I could never compete. She was the family brains as well as beauty. And so it went. Phi Beta Kappa at Smith College, majoring in art history. She went west to work at the Toledo Museum, met and married Steve, had 4 children, learned to fly an airplane, soloed, helped get Toledo's fledgling public radio station off the ground, went on to serve on the national board of the public broadcasting system, pitched in with Steve to found and manage an internationally recognized guest ranch, the Home Ranch in Clark, Colorado. And trips, we traveled together a lot, in France and Italy and Ireland and Egypt and in the Caribbean. But Ann took the rolling landscape of West Slope, Colorado most deeply into her heart. With her children out of the nest, she enrolled in the creative writing program at Bowling Green University and emerged with a master's degree in the makings of a book of poems. Window on the River was published a couple of years later, its cover featuring a pen and ink view of the James River as we saw it years ago, down the hill between the trees from the screened porch of our bungalow on Pump House Road. After Steve's burial in Clark, Ann made an off-the-cuff decision to check out Shell Point, where our mom had lived for the last 16 years of her life. Settling in at Shell Point, she took it on and found a happy community there in the arts, writing, and acting. After a complete remodel of her first Shell Point apartment, burdened with an inherited and never fully extinguished need to move furniture around, she looked northward to find an elderly condominium apartment on the village green in Norfolk that needed a bit of work. That finished, she reached out to Western Michigan and found and married Norm, introducing him to her world of style and care for others, sadly truncated for both of them. In their last months together, they'd been looking at plans of a high-rise apartment in Denver, imagining how they might improve it. She'd have been 89 this September. When I was 6 or 7, I read in my weekly reader that the girls in our class would live to the age of 68, while the boys would be gone by 63. I took it very seriously, and when our teacher pointed out that we boys would be lucky to make it to the turn of the century, as it turned out, when that moment rolled around, it found Ann and me and Allie and Steve all feeling quite youthful, sitting around Ann's dining room table in Perrysburg, savoring a crown roast of pork she'd spent most of the day creating, and savoring some of Grandfather Stranahan's most ancient Burgundy. A solid piece of me is gone now for sure, but looking back, I'd have to say that we together, that is, she, Ann, had a good long run of it. We're all grateful to you, Ann, for sharing your life with us. Thank you.
Thank you all for being with us, and thank the gods for Ann. There are things to eat and drink and music in the Libby Court. Just look at the pictures. You'll know where you are. And we'll see you out there. Thank you.